The chains bit into Elena's wrists as two guards forced her through the iron gates of the throne hall. She did not cry out. She had promised herself, somewhere between the forest and the fortress, that she would not give these people the sound of her fear. The Blackthorn court stood in rows on either side of the long stone path, their eyes sharp with judgment, their whispers sliding over her like cold water. She kept her chin high, though her knees trembled beneath her torn dress. She was innocent. She knew this with every breath in her body. But innocence had never mattered much to people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. At the end of the hall, seated on a throne carved from black wood and silver, was the man they called the Alpha King, Draven. She had heard stories about him long before she ever set foot in his territory. They said his eyes could freeze a man's blood. They said he had not smiled since the night his first mate died in his arms, torn apart by enemies who had wanted his throne more than they feared his wrath. They said he ruled through strength alone, because he no longer believed in anything softer. Elena had never expected to stand before him. She certainly never expected what happened the moment their eyes met. A sudden heat exploded across her collarbone, so fierce that she gasped and stumbled forward, held upright only by the guards gripping her arms. The mark, a small crescent shape she had carried since birth and never understood, burned, as though someone had pressed a coal against her skin. She pressed her bound hands to her chest, trying to breathe through the pain. On the throne, Draven went rigid. He knew that burn. He had felt it once before, years ago, in a fleeting and forgotten dream he refused to remember. It was the mark of the mate bond, the ancient magic that chose one soul for another across the entire world, whether either of them wanted it or not. He rose from his throne, staring down at the trembling woman in chains, and for one heartbeat, something in his chest cracked open. Then he shut it closed again. "You stand accused of treason against the Blackthorn pack," he said, his voice flat and cold, carrying easily across the silent hall. "Conspiring with outside wolves to weaken our borders. Do you deny it?" "I deny it," Elena said, her voice shaking but clear. "I have never conspired against anyone. I did not even know your borders existed until your soldiers dragged me across them." A murmur rippled through the court. Draven raised a hand, and it died instantly. He studied her. Even in chains, even bruised and dirty from days of travel, there was something about her that unsettled him. The bond mark on her collarbone glowed faintly beneath her torn collar, matching the phantom heat now spreading beneath his own skin, right above his heart, where his own mark had lain dormant and cold for years. He told himself it meant nothing. Marks could be false. Bonds could be manufactured by clever enemies who knew the old magic and wished to use it as a weapon. His cousin, Lord Kale, had warned him of exactly this kind of trick only weeks ago, describing rumors of an assassin sent to infiltrate the royal bloodline through the mate bond itself. "Bring forward the evidence," Draven said. A thin, nervous man stepped forward holding a folded letter, its wax seal broken. He read aloud words that accused Elena of meeting with rival wolves near the northern woods, of passing along maps of the Blackthorn defenses, of plotting the king's downfall. Elena's stomach turned to ice. "I have never seen that letter," she said. "I have never met with anyone from outside my village. I was gathering herbs in the forest when your soldiers found me and dragged me here without explanation." "The letter bears your name," the man said. "Then someone else wrote it," Elena said, desperation creeping into her voice now. "Someone who wanted me blamed for something I did not do." Draven watched her closely. He had seen liars before, plenty of them, wolves who would say anything to save their own skin. But something about the way she spoke, the steadiness beneath her fear, made him hesitate. It did not matter. He could not afford hesitation, not with his throne still fragile from the wars that had taken his first mate, not with enemies circling like vultures waiting for any sign of weakness. A king who let sentiment guide his judgment was a king who would not survive the season. "Take her to the dungeon," he said, "until we determine the full truth of these charges." "Please," Elena said, and for the first time her voice cracked completely. "I am telling the truth. I have done nothing wrong." Draven did not look at her again. He turned and walked back toward his private chambers, leaving the guards to drag her away, leaving the burning mark on his chest to ache with every step he took. He told himself the ache would fade. It did not. The dungeon beneath Blackthorn Castle was carved from the same dark stone as the throne room above, but it held none of that room's grandeur. Elena was thrown into a narrow cell with a floor of packed earth and a single slit of window too high to reach, too small to offer more than a sliver of gray sky. The door slammed shut behind her, and the sound of the guard's footsteps faded into silence. She sank onto the cold ground and finally allowed herself to cry. She thought of her small cottage at the edge of the village, of the garden she had tended since she was a child, of the quiet life she had built for herself after her parents passed. She had never wanted trouble. She had never wanted power or politics or the attention of kings. She had simply wanted to live. Now she did not know if she would live at all. Days passed in a blur of gray light and silence. A guard brought her thin broth once a day, sliding it beneath the door without a word. She learned to recognize the change of shifts by the different weight of footsteps outside her cell. She learned to measure time by the slow crawl of light across the stone floor. She thought often of the burning mark, and of the way the king's expression had changed for just a moment when their eyes met. She did not understand what it meant, only that it frightened her more than anything else that had happened since her arrest. She had heard old stories about mate bonds from her grandmother, tales of two souls destined to find each other no matter the distance between them. She had always assumed they were just stories, comforting fictions for lonely hearts. Now she was not so sure. On the seventh night, she woke to a strange warmth low in her belly, different from the burning mark, softer and stranger. She pressed her palm against her stomach and went very still. She counted the days in her mind, back to a night many weeks ago that she had tried very hard not to think about, a night in the forest, lost in a storm, when a stranger with dark eyes and a quiet voice had helped her find shelter and warmth against the cold. A night neither of them had planned, born of comfort and fear, and something neither could name, before he vanished into the trees at dawn, without so much as a name exchanged between them. She had told herself it meant nothing. A single night, a single mistake, easily forgotten. Now, sitting in a dungeon cell beneath a king's castle, she understood with sudden and terrifying clarity exactly what that night had left behind. She was carrying a child. Elena pressed both hands against her stomach and closed her eyes. Fear and wonder tangled together inside her chest. She had no one to turn to, no one to trust with this knowledge. If the guards discovered the truth, she did not know what they would do to her, or to the innocent life growing inside her. She decided, in that moment, that she would tell no one. Not the guards, not the cold-eyed king who had condemned her without listening. She would protect this secret with everything she had left, because it was the only thing in this entire nightmare that still belonged to her. Above her, in the highest tower of the castle, Draven stood at his window, staring out at the dark forest beyond the castle walls, unable to sleep. The mark on his chest had not stopped aching since the moment he first saw her. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself a king could not be ruled by old magic and older stories, that he had a kingdom to protect, and enemies who would tear it apart the instant he showed weakness. He told himself the woman in his dungeon was likely exactly what the evidence claimed her to be, a pawn or a spy, sent to unravel everything he had rebuilt since the war that took his first mate. But some quiet, stubborn part of him kept circling back to the sound of her voice when she said she had done nothing wrong. He did not sleep that night, nor the next. Each night, the mark burned a little brighter, a little more insistent, as though something ancient and patient was trying to make him understand a truth he was not yet ready to face. In the dungeon below, Elena curled against the cold stone wall, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, and made herself a single promise in the darkness. Whatever happened to her, she would survive long enough to protect her child. Even if it meant surviving the king who had put her here. The morning the guard changed was the morning everything shifted. Elena had grown used to the heavy tread of the usual jailer, a broad man named Gareth who never spoke and never looked at her directly. But on this particular morning, the footsteps outside her cell were lighter, quicker, and paused for a long moment before the small hatch in the door slid open. A young woman's face appeared in the gap, framed by a plain gray hood. Her eyes were kind and nervous, and darted down the corridor before she spoke. "I am Clara," she whispered. "I work in the kitchens. I heard what happened to you, and I do not believe it." Elena crawled closer to the door, her heart pounding with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." "Because my brother was accused of something he did not do, 3 winters ago," Clara said. "No one believed him either. He is gone now, and I have never stopped wondering if I could have done something to save him." She pushed a small bundle through the gap in the door. "It is only bread and a little water, but it is more than they are giving you." Elena took the bundle with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not know how to repay this kindness." "Just survive," Clara said. "That is all I ask." Over the following days, Clara returned whenever she could slip away from her duties, bringing small scraps of food, and, more valuable than food, small scraps of information. She told Elena about the tension gripping the castle, about whispers that Lord Kale, the king's own cousin, had been unusually eager to see Elena punished, pressing the council for a swift execution rather than a proper trial. "He has always wanted more power than his birth allows him," Clara murmured one evening, crouched close to the door. "Some say he resents that the throne passed to Draven, and not to him. Others say he has been maneuvering for years, waiting for the right moment to strike." Elena absorbed every word carefully, turning the pieces over in her mind like stones. If someone truly had forged that letter to frame her, someone eager to see her blamed and quickly silenced, then Lord Kale's name fit disturbingly well. But she had no proof. And a prisoner accusing a lord of treason, with nothing but suspicion to support her, would only seal her fate faster. She kept the theory to herself, and continued to endure the slow, grinding days of imprisonment, one hand often resting over her stomach as the small life inside her grew, silent and secret, and entirely her own. The pregnancy brought new difficulties she had not anticipated. Some mornings she woke feeling faint, her stomach turning at the smell of the thin broth the guards provided. She learned to eat slowly, to rest whenever her body demanded it despite the hard, unforgiving floor beneath her. She thought constantly about the stranger from the storm, wondering if she would ever see him again, wondering what he would think if he knew what that single night together had created. She never once suspected that the stranger and the king sitting on his cold throne were the very same man. Draven, for his part, could not explain the storm of feeling that had taken hold of him since Elena's arrival. He found himself standing outside the dungeon entrance more than once, hand raised to open the door, only to turn away before he could bring himself to face her again. He told himself it was strategy, that a king needed to understand his prisoner before deciding her fate. He told himself many things, none of which felt entirely true. His advisor, an elderly woman named Maribel who had served 3 generations of Blackthorn rulers, watched him with growing concern. "You have not slept properly in a week," she said one evening, finding him alone in his study, staring at nothing. "I have seen that look before, Your Majesty. It is the look of a man fighting something he cannot win." "I do not know what you mean," Draven said. Maribel studied him, with the patience of someone who had raised him since he was a boy grieving his own parents. "The mark on your chest has not stopped glowing since the woman arrived. Do not think I have not noticed." Draven said nothing, which was answer enough. "The mate bond is not a curse to be denied, Draven," Maribel said gently. "It is one of the oldest and most sacred forces our people know. If she truly carries your mark, imprisoning her is not simply cruel. It is dangerous. The bond, when broken or denied, does not fade quietly. It festers. It can poison the very magic that protects this kingdom." "She is accused of treason," Draven said, his voice tight. "Accused," Maribel repeated, "not proven. And I would ask you, my king, to consider who benefits most from her swift and quiet punishment before the truth is ever properly examined." Draven's jaw tightened. He had already begun to wonder the same thing, though he had not allowed himself to say it aloud. Lord Kale had been unusually insistent in council meetings, pushing for a fast resolution, discouraging any deeper investigation into the letter's origin. "I will look into it," Draven said finally. "See that you do," Maribel said. "Before the bond you are ignoring destroys something neither of us can repair." That night, unable to bear the ache in his chest any longer, Draven made his way down to the dungeon alone, dismissing the guards stationed outside. He stood before Elena's cell for a long moment, listening to the quiet sound of her breathing on the other side of the door, before he finally spoke. "I am told you have not eaten the food provided," he said. Silence answered him at first, then the shuffle of movement, and Elena's voice, wary and exhausted. The food provided is barely fit for animals. I eat what little I am given. That was not what I meant, Draven said, though he was not entirely certain what he had meant either. There was a long pause. Why are you here? Elena finally asked. You have already decided I am guilty. What more do you want from me? Draven found he had no easy answer. He stood in the dark corridor, with his hand pressed flat against the cold stone door, feeling the mark on his chest pulse warm and steady, and for the first time since the war that took everything from him, he felt something dangerously close to doubt. I want to know the truth, he said finally. I have already told you the truth, Elena said. You simply did not want to hear it. Draven had no response to that. He turned and walked away without another word, but the sound of her voice followed him up every stair, echoing through his mind, long after he had returned to his empty chambers. He did not sleep again that night either. And the council chamber was tense the following morning, thick with the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Draven sat at the head of the long table, listening as his advisors debated the fate of the prisoner in the dungeon below. Lord Kale sat near the far end, his fingers steepled, his expression carefully composed. The evidence is clear, Kale said smoothly. The letter bears her name, describes meetings with wolves from the northern packs, details our patrol routes with disturbing accuracy. I recommend a swift resolution before this matter becomes a distraction the kingdom cannot afford. A swift resolution, Draven repeated, watching his cousin carefully. You mean her execution? I mean justice, Kale said, his tone even. Delayed justice only invites further doubt among the people. They need to see strength from their king, not hesitation. Around the table, several advisors nodded in agreement, though Maribel remained silent, her sharp eyes fixed on Kale with quiet suspicion. Draven leaned back in his chair, studying the letter that had been placed before him for what felt like the 100th time. Something about it had always nagged at him, though he could not quite name what. He picked it up now, turning it toward the light from the tall windows, examining the ink, the handwriting, the seal. This seal, he said slowly, it bears the mark of the northern packs, but the wax itself is a shade darker than the seals I have seen used by their messengers in the past. Has anyone compared it directly? A brief silence fell over the table. Kale's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, subtle and quick, gone almost before Draven could be certain he had seen it at all. I am certain it is simply a matter of aging wax, Kale said. These things vary. Perhaps, Draven said. I will have it examined further before any final decision is made. Your Majesty, with respect, Kale said, a thread of urgency creeping into his voice. Further delay only weakens your position. The court already whispers about your hesitation regarding this prisoner. Some even wonder if the old stories of the mate bond have clouded your judgment. The words landed like a blade, precise and deliberate. Draven felt the entire table's attention shift toward him, waiting to see how he would respond. My judgment, Draven said, his voice low and even, is not clouded by anything, except a desire to see justice done properly. If that displeases anyone at this table, they are welcome to voice their concerns directly, rather than through whispered rumors. No one spoke again. Later that day, walking alone through the castle's eastern corridor, Draven passed near the entrance to the dungeon stairs without intending to. The mark on his chest flared suddenly, sharp and insistent, and he stopped mid-stride, pressing a hand against his sternum. Below him, in her cell, Elena gasped and doubled over as her own mark blazed to life, burning brighter than it ever had before, spreading heat across her collarbone and down toward her racing heart. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall, breathing hard through the pain, one hand instinctively covering her stomach, as though to shield the small life within from whatever force was tearing through her body. Neither of them understood, in that moment, what the sudden intensity meant. Neither of them yet knew that a bond denied too long, stretched too thin between distance and doubt, begins to demand attention in ways that cannot be ignored. Draven made his way down the stairs before he had fully decided to, driven by an instinct older and stronger than his own careful control. He reached Elena's cell to find her curled against the wall, pale and shaking, sweat beading on her forehead despite the dungeon's chill. What is happening to you? He demanded. unlocking the door and stepping inside before he could stop himself. "I do not know," Elena gasped. "It has never burned like this before." Draven knelt beside her, his own chest aching in perfect rhythm with whatever was happening to her. He reached out, hesitated, then gently pressed his palm against her shoulder. The moment his skin touched hers, both marks flared one final time and then, slowly, began to settle, the pain receding like a tide pulling back from the shore. Elena opened her eyes and found herself staring directly into his. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The dungeon around them seemed to disappear entirely, leaving only the quiet, undeniable pull between them, a force neither had chosen but both could no longer deny existed. "You felt it too," Elena whispered. "Just now, I saw it in your face." Draven withdrew his hands slowly, standing and putting distance between them, as though putting distance between himself and something he could not yet accept. "It does not change anything," he said, though his voice lacked its usual certainty. "You are still accused of treason. And you still have not asked me a single honest question about what actually happened that day," Elena said, some of her earlier fire returning despite her exhaustion. "You have only listened to a letter, and to men who benefit from my silence." Draven's jaw tightened. He knew, somewhere beneath his pride, that she was right. He had built his entire reign on caution and control since the loss of his first mate, refusing to let sentiment guide decisions that could cost lives. But standing here now, watching her steady herself against the wall, one protective hand pressed against her middle in a gesture he did not yet understand the meaning of, he felt the careful walls he had built around himself beginning to crack. "Tell me everything," he said finally, "from the beginning. Leave nothing out." And so, for the first time since her arrest, Elena told her story to someone willing to actually listen. Elena spoke slowly at first, her voice hoarse from disuse, but steadier with every sentence, as the weight of unspoken truth finally found release. She told Draven about her quiet village at the edge of the eastern woods, about the small cottage she had inherited from her parents, about the herbs she gathered and sold to sustain herself, since she had no pack, no title, and no family left to depend on. She told him about the morning the soldiers arrived, dragging her from her garden without explanation, refusing to answer her questions as they bound her wrists and marched her toward Blackthorn territory. She told him she had never once traveled beyond her village borders before that day, let alone met with wolves from the northern packs as the letter claimed. Draven listened without interrupting, something he rarely allowed himself to do in matters of state. He found himself studying her face as she spoke, searching for the small tells of dishonesty he had learned to recognize over years of ruling a kingdom full of ambitious, scheming courtiers. He found none, only exhaustion and frustration, and a stubborn thread of dignity that refused to break, despite everything she had endured. "If you have never met with the northern packs," Draven said slowly, "then someone else wrote that letter using your name deliberately. Someone who knew enough about you to make the accusation believable." "I do not know who would do such a thing," Elena said. "I have no enemies. I have barely any acquaintances beyond my own village." "Then perhaps the target was never truly you," Draven said, more to himself than to her. "Perhaps you were simply a convenient name to attach to a lie, meant to accomplish something else entirely." Elena watched him carefully. "You believe me?" It was not quite a question, but Draven answered it as though it were. "I am beginning to." The admission seemed to cost him something. He rose to his feet, putting distance between them once again, though this time it felt less like retreat and more like a man trying to steady himself before deciding his next move. "I cannot release you outright," he said. "Not without proof strong enough to satisfy the council, or Lord Kale will use it as a weapon against my authority. But I can order a proper investigation into the letter's origin, starting with the seal itself." "Why does that matter so much to you?" Elena asked. "The seal, I mean." "Because the wax was wrong," Draven said. "A small detail, easy to overlook, but wrong nonetheless. If someone forged the Northern Pact seal imperfectly, it suggests they did not have direct access to genuine Northern correspondence, which means they created the letter here, within these walls." Elena's breath caught. "You think someone inside your own court framed me?" "I think it is possible," Draven said. And I think I know exactly who benefits most from your quick and quiet punishment." He did not say the name aloud, but Elena saw it in the tightness around his eyes, the controlled anger in his posture. She thought of Clara's whispered warnings about Lord Cale, about his resentment toward the throne he believed should have been his. "Be careful," she said softly. "If he is willing to forge evidence and frame an innocent woman to protect his position, he will not hesitate to move against you as well." Something flickered across Draven's face, surprise perhaps, at the genuine concern in her voice, despite everything he had put her through. He studied her for a long moment before nodding once, sharply. "I will be careful," he said. "In the meantime, I will have proper food and blankets brought to your cell. You should not be suffering unnecessarily while I sort out the truth." He turned to leave, then paused at the door, glancing back at her, with an expression she could not quite read. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I am sorry for how quickly I judged you. It was not fair, and it was not the mark of a king I wished to be." Elena said nothing, too surprised by the admission to find words, and Draven left before she could respond, closing the cell door gently behind him, rather than slamming it as the guards usually did. Over the following days, small changes began to appear in Elena's circumstances. The thin broth was replaced with proper meals, still simple but nourishing enough to ease the constant hunger she had grown used to enduring. A woolen blanket appeared, thick enough to keep out the worst of the dungeon's chill. Clara continued her secret visits, bringing news along with her small gifts of food, her eyes wide with cautious hope, as she relayed rumors that the king himself had ordered an investigation into the letter's true origin. "The whole castle is talking about it," Clara whispered one evening. "No one has ever seen him question a council decision so openly before. Some say it is the mate bond working its magic on him. Others say he has simply grown tired of Lord Cale's constant maneuvering." "Perhaps it is both," Elena said, resting a hand over her stomach, which had begun, just barely, to show the faintest curve of new life growing within her. She had not yet told anyone the truth of her condition, not even Clara, though she suspected the kind kitchen girl had begun to notice the subtle changes in her appetite and the careful way she moved. She was not ready to speak the words aloud, not until she understood more clearly what kind of world her child would be born into, whether kindness or cruelty, safety or danger. Meanwhile, Draven pursued the investigation with a quiet intensity that unsettled even his closest advisors. He questioned the messenger who had delivered the letter, tracing its path backward through the castle's internal correspondence, until he found inconsistencies that pointed, with increasing clarity, towards someone close to the throne itself. He said nothing to Cale directly, choosing instead to watch and wait, gathering evidence patiently, before revealing his suspicions. He had learned, over years of careful rule, that confronting an enemy too early only gave them time to cover their tracks. But every night, as he lay awake in his empty chambers, his thoughts returned inevitably to the woman in the dungeon below, to the steady courage in her voice, to the mark on her collarbone that continued to pulse warm against his own chest no matter how much distance separated them. He was beginning to understand, slowly and reluctantly, that whatever bond connected them was not something he could simply command away through royal will alone. It was something he would eventually have to choose. The guard who came to Draven with the truth arrived late one night, nervous and pale, glancing over his shoulder as though he feared being followed. His name was Edmund, one of the younger men assigned to the dungeon rotation, and he had asked for a private audience with the king, under circumstances so unusual that Draven agreed immediately. "Your Majesty," Edmund said, his voice low, even though they stood alone in Draven's private study. "I have information about the prisoner I believe you need to know." Draven set down the papers he had been reviewing, giving the young guard his full attention. "Speak freely. Nothing you say leaves this room." Edmund hesitated, then continued. "She is with child, Your Majesty. I have watched her carefully these past weeks, at Lord Cale's request, and I am certain of it. She hides it well, but the signs are unmistakable to anyone paying close attention." The room went very still. Draven felt something cold settle in his stomach, quickly followed by a rush of understanding that connected pieces he had not realized were missing. "You said Lord Cale asked you to watch her," Draven said slowly. "For what purpose?" Edmund's hands trembled slightly. He wanted to know if she showed any signs of being with child, Your Majesty. He seemed very concerned about it, though he never explained why. I did not think much of it until recently, when I realized what her condition meant. Draven's mind raced, calculating dates, remembering a night many weeks ago that he had spent buried deep in memory, refusing to examine too closely. A storm. A stranger, seeking shelter in the forest. A single night, neither of them had planned, ended before dawn, when he had fled back to his duties, without exchanging names, telling himself it had been nothing more than a moment of weakness he would never repeat. He had not connected that stranger to the woman in his dungeon until this exact moment, and the realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. "Leave me," he said quietly to Edmund, "and speak of this to no one. Your discretion will be rewarded." Edmund bowed quickly and left, and Draven sat alone in the silence of his study, staring at nothing, understanding crashing over him in waves. The child Elena carried was not simply evidence of some past indiscretion on her part, as the court might assume if the truth ever surfaced. The child was his. He rose from his chair and made his way to the dungeon before he had fully decided to move, driven entirely by instinct and a desperate need to confirm what some part of him already knew to be true. Elena looked up in surprise as her cell door opened, startled by the lateness of the hour. She saw something different in Draven's expression this time, a raw uncertainty that had not been there before. "I know your secret," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. Elena's face drained of color. "I do not know what you mean." "You are with child," Draven said. "And I believe I know who the father is." Elena's hands flew protectively to her stomach, her eyes wide with fear, and something else. Something like recognition dawning slowly across her features, as she studied his face more closely than she ever had before, searching for the echo of a stranger she had met once, in the middle of a storm. "It was you," she whispered. "The night in the forest. I never saw your face clearly in the dark, but your voice, the way you spoke, I did not realize until this very moment." "Neither did I," Draven admitted. "Not until tonight." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of the revelation settling heavily between them. Elena felt a strange mixture of relief and terror flood through her, relief that the truth was finally spoken aloud, terror at what it might mean for her and the child she carried. "What happens now?" she asked. "Will you use this against me somehow? Will you take my child from me?" "No," Draven said immediately, surprising himself with the certainty in his own voice. "This child is mine as much as yours. I will not allow any harm to come to either of you, not from Kale, not from anyone in this court who wishes to see you silenced." "Kale already knows," Elena said, remembering Edmund's report. "He has known for some time, according to what you just told me. Why would he care about my pregnancy, unless it threatened him somehow?" Draven's expression darkened as the pieces clicked fully into place. "Because if the child is mine, and you bear the mate mark, then this child is not simply my heir by choice. It is my heir by ancient law, a claim far stronger than anything Kale could ever manufacture for himself. He needed you silenced and discredited before that truth could ever come to light." Elena absorbed this with growing horror. "Then he framed me, not simply to remove a threat, but to remove your child before it could threaten his own ambitions." "Yes," Draven said grimly. "And I intend to make him answer for it." He knelt before her then, an act so unexpected from a king that Elena stared at him in stunned silence. He took her hands gently in his own, his dark eyes searching her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I have wronged you gravely," he said. "I imprisoned an innocent woman, ignored the bond between us out of pride and fear, and nearly allowed my own child to be endangered through my failure to see the truth sooner. I cannot undo what has already happened, but I can promise you this. I will find every piece of evidence needed to clear your name, and I will protect you and our child with everything I possess, whatever the cost." Elena studied him carefully, torn between the lingering pain of her imprisonment and the raw sincerity she saw in his face. Trust did not come easily after everything she had endured, but something in his voice, in the warmth of his hands around hers, made her want, desperately, to believe him. "Prove it," she said finally. "Words are easy, Your Majesty. Actions are what I need to see." "Then I will show you," Draven said, rising to his feet with new resolve hardening in his expression. "Starting tomorrow, in front of the entire council. The council chamber was full the next morning, every seat occupied, word having spread quickly that the king intended to make an important announcement regarding the prisoner. Lord Cale sat in his usual place, composed as always, though Draven noticed the faintest tension in his shoulders as the meeting began. "I have called this gathering," Draven said, his voice carrying clearly across the room, "to address the matter of the prisoner currently held in our dungeon." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Cale leaned forward slightly, his expression carefully neutral. "After a thorough investigation," Draven continued, "I have found significant evidence suggesting the letter used to accuse her of treason was forged, likely by someone within this very castle, using knowledge only an insider could possess." The murmurs grew louder. Draven raised his hand, and silence fell. "I have questioned the messenger who delivered the letter," he said, "and traced its origin back through our internal correspondence. The seal used to authenticate the letter does not match genuine Northern Pack seals in composition, suggesting it was created here, by someone attempting to imitate their mark without direct access to their materials." He let the words settle before continuing, his eyes moving deliberately toward Cale, who had gone very still. "I have also learned that the prisoner is carrying a child," Draven said, "my child. Which means, under the ancient laws governing our bloodline, that child holds a legitimate claim to this throne, regardless of the circumstances of their conception. Someone in this castle appears to have understood that fact well before I did myself, and moved to eliminate the threat before it could be recognized." The chamber erupted into stunned whispers. Cale's composure finally cracked, just slightly, a tightening around his eyes that Draven had learned to recognize over years of watching his cousin navigate court politics with careful precision. "This is a serious accusation, Your Majesty," Cale said, his voice measured despite the tension now radiating from him. "Surely you are not suggesting I had any involvement in such a scheme." "I am suggesting," Draven said evenly, "that very few people in this castle would benefit as significantly from removing both the mother and the child of a legitimate heir. And I intend to find proof, one way or another, of exactly who orchestrated this deception." "You have no proof against me specifically," Cale said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier smoothness. "Not yet," Draven agreed, "but I will." He turned to address the full council, his voice hardening with royal authority. "Effective immediately, the prisoner is released from the dungeon and returned to proper quarters, befitting her status, as mother, to a potential heir. All charges against her are suspended, pending full investigation into the letter's true origin. Anyone found to have participated in fabricating false evidence against her will face the full consequences our laws demand, regardless of their position or bloodline." His eyes remained fixed on Cale as he spoke the final words, and the message was unmistakable to everyone in the room. The council dispersed slowly afterward, whispers trailing behind them as they processed the morning's revelations. Draven made his way immediately to the dungeon, wanting to deliver the news to Elena himself. He found her sitting quietly on the thin cot, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, as she often did now. She looked up as he entered, searching his face for news. "It is done," Draven said. "You are free. The council has suspended all charges pending investigation." Relief flooded across Elena's features, followed quickly by wariness. "Free to go where?" "Back to my village. Alone, while your cousin continues plotting against us from within your own court?" Draven considered this carefully. "I would prefer you remain here, under proper protection, until the investigation is complete, and Cale's involvement is fully exposed. You would be given proper quarters, proper care, everything you and our child require. And if I do not wish to remain in the very castle where I was imprisoned and nearly condemned to death?" Elena asked, her voice sharp with lingering hurt. "You imprisoned me for weeks, Draven. You listened to lies over the truth I offered you from the very beginning. Freedom now does not simply erase what happened before." Draven's expression sobered, understanding the depth of the wound he had caused, however unintentionally it had begun. "You are right to be angry. I failed you when it mattered most, and I do not expect that failure to be forgiven simply because I have finally chosen to act correctly. But I am asking you to stay, not as your king commanding a subject, but as the father of your child, asking for the chance to make things right, slowly, over time, if you will allow it." Elena studied him for a long moment. torn between the anger she still carried and the strange, undeniable warmth that flickered beneath it whenever she looked at him now, understanding fully who he was to her. The mark on her collarbone pulsed gently, a quiet reminder of the bond neither of them had chosen, but both now had to reckon with. "I will stay," she said finally, "for the sake of our child's safety, and because I do not wish to face Cale's schemes without knowing what he might attempt next. But do not mistake my presence for forgiveness, Draven. That will take considerably longer to earn." "I understand," Draven said, and meant it fully. "I do not expect it quickly. I only ask for the chance to try." He led her from the dungeon himself, through corridors she had not seen since her arrival, into a wing of the castle reserved for family and honored guests. The rooms he brought her to were warm and bright, filled with soft furnishings and tall windows that looked out over the castle gardens, a stark contrast to the cold stone cell she had endured for weeks. "This will be your quarters," Draven said. "Guards will be posted outside at all times, loyal men I trust personally, chosen specifically to ensure your safety." Elena walked slowly through the room, running her fingers over the soft blankets on the bed, still adjusting to the sudden shift from imprisonment to comfort. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for finally listening, for finally seeing the truth." "Thank you for surviving long enough to let me," Draven replied, and the honesty in his voice settled something between them. Not quite trust, not yet, but the first fragile beginning of it. That night, for the first time in weeks, Elena slept in a soft bed rather than on cold stone, her hand resting over her stomach, allowing herself, cautiously, to hope for a future she had not dared imagine while trapped in the darkness below. The days following Elena's release settled into a careful rhythm. She remained within her new quarters most of the time, still wary of the court's watchful eyes, though Clara visited often now, without needing to hide, bringing warm meals and cheerful conversation that helped ease the lingering weight of the weeks Elena had spent in the dungeon. Draven, meanwhile, pursued his investigation into Lord Cale with quiet determination, gathering evidence piece by careful piece. He questioned servants who had witnessed unusual meetings between Cale and unfamiliar messengers in the weeks before Elena's arrest. He examined financial records showing unexplained payments made around the same time the forged letter first appeared. Slowly, methodically, the picture of his cousin's betrayal became impossible to ignore. Maribel assisted him in the search, her decades of experience within the castle walls proving invaluable in uncovering old secrets long buried beneath layers of court politics. "He has resented you since the day the council chose you over him to inherit the throne," Maribel said one evening, laying out documents across Draven's desk. "His mother was your father's elder sister, and Cale always believed the succession should have passed through her line instead. He has been patient, biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim what he believes is rightfully his." "And he saw Elena's child as exactly that opportunity," Draven said grimly, studying the evidence before him. A legitimate heir, born from the mate bond itself, would end any hope he had of eventually claiming the throne, through manipulation or marriage into the royal line. "Precisely," Maribel said. "Which means he will not stop, simply because his first attempt failed. Men like Cale do not surrender their ambitions easily. You must be prepared for him to try again, likely with greater desperation and less caution than before." Draven's expression hardened with resolve. "Then we will be ready for him." That evening, he visited Elena's quarters to update her on the investigation's progress, finding her seated near the window, watching the sunset paint the castle gardens in soft shades of orange and gold. She had grown more comfortable in his presence over the past weeks, though a careful distance still remained between them, built from lingering hurt that healed slowly, one small gesture of trust at a time. "We have found enough evidence to formally charge Cale with treason and forgery," Draven said, settling into the chair across from her. "Financial records, witness testimony, and the flawed seal itself all point directly to his involvement." "What happens now?" Elena asked. "I intend to confront him tomorrow, before the full council, presenting the evidence publicly, so there can be no question of his guilt afterward," Draven said. "It is important that everyone understands the truth clearly, both to clear your name completely and to prevent any future attempts to twist the narrative in his favor." Elena nodded slowly, though worry creased her brow. "Be careful. A man who has already shown he is willing to forge evidence and endanger innocent lives to protect his ambitions, may not simply accept defeat quietly. "I know," Draven said. "I have already doubled the guards throughout the castle, and Maribel has taken precautions to ensure Kale cannot flee or rally support before the confrontation." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Elena found herself studying Draven's profile in the dim light, noticing the tension he carried in his shoulders, the weight of ruling a kingdom while navigating threats from within his own bloodline. "You carry a great deal on your shoulders," she said softly. "I have carried it alone for a long time," Draven admitted, surprising himself with the honesty of the admission. "Since I lost my first mate, I built walls around myself, believing it was the only way to protect what remained of my kingdom, and myself. I told myself sentiment was a weakness I could not afford." "And now?" Elena asked quietly. Draven turned to look at her fully, something soft and searching in his expression. "Now I am beginning to understand that some walls, built too high and held too long, cause more damage than the pain they were meant to protect against." Elena's breath caught at the vulnerability in his voice, so different from the cold, commanding king who had condemned her without a second glance weeks ago. She reached out slowly, placing her hand over his where it rested on the arm of his chair. "Walls can be lowered slowly," she said. "It does not have to happen all at once." Draven turned his hand beneath hers, lacing their fingers together gently, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, simply sitting together in the quiet room, allowing the fragile beginning of something new to grow between them, unspoken but undeniable. The following morning, Draven called an emergency session of the full council. Kale arrived, composed as always, though Draven noticed his cousin's eyes flick briefly toward the extra guards stationed around the chamber's perimeter, a flicker of understanding crossing his features, before he schooled his expression back into calm indifference. "I have gathered you all today," Draven began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent chamber, "to present conclusive evidence regarding the forged letter used to falsely accuse an innocent woman of treason." He laid out the evidence methodically, piece by piece: financial records connecting Kale to unexplained payments, witness testimony describing secret meetings with unfamiliar messengers, and finally the flawed seal itself, compared directly against genuine Northern Pact correspondence for the entire council to examine. "The evidence points clearly and consistently toward Lord Kale's involvement in fabricating this letter," Draven concluded, motivated by his desire to eliminate a legitimate threat to his own ambitions for the throne. The chamber fell into stunned silence. All eyes turned toward Kale, who had gone very pale, his careful composure finally beginning to crack under the weight of undeniable proof laid bare before the entire court. "This is madness," Kale said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Circumstantial evidence, nothing more." "You cannot possibly—" "I can, and I have," Draven said, his voice hardening with royal authority. "Lord Kale, you stand accused of treason, forgery, and conspiracy against the throne. Guards, take him into custody until his formal trial can be arranged." Kale's mask finally shattered completely, fury replacing his earlier calm as guards moved to restrain him. "You will regret this, cousin," he spat, struggling briefly against their grip before recognizing the futility of resistance. "The throne should have been mine from the beginning. I will not simply disappear quietly into a cell while you and your commoner mate parade around with a child that should never have existed." "Take him away," Draven said coldly, refusing to rise to the bait. As the guards dragged Kale from the chamber, his threats echoing behind him, Draven felt a grim satisfaction settle over him, tempered by the knowledge that his cousin's defiant words carried a warning that could not be entirely dismissed. This was not over yet. With Kale formally imprisoned pending trial, the castle settled into an uneasy calm, though Draven remained cautious, aware that his cousin's supporters within the court had not simply vanished alongside their leader's downfall. He increased security throughout the castle grounds, personally reviewing the loyalty of every guard assigned near Elena's quarters, unwilling to risk any possibility of retaliation against her or their unborn child. Elena, for her part, found herself slowly settling into a rhythm within the castle that felt, cautiously, like the beginning of a new life. Her pregnancy progressed steadily, the small curve of her stomach now impossible to hide beneath her clothing, drawing curious and often kind glances from the castle staff, who had grown fond of her gentle nature during her recovery. Clara remained a constant companion, their friendship having deepened considerably since those first secret visits during Elena's imprisonment. They spent quiet afternoons together in the castle gardens, Clara sharing stories about growing up within Blackthorn territory, Elena slowly opening up about her own quiet life before everything had changed so dramatically. "Do you think you could ever truly forgive him?" Clara asked one afternoon, as they sat together beneath a flowering tree, watching the gentle breeze stir the blossoms above them. "The king, I mean, for everything that happened before." Elena considered the question carefully, her hand resting over her stomach, as she felt the faint, fluttering movement of the child growing within her. "I do not know," she admitted. "He has shown genuine effort since learning the truth, and I believe his remorse is sincere. But trust is not something rebuilt through good intentions alone. It requires time and consistency and proof that extends beyond a single crisis successfully resolved." "That seems fair," Clara said, "though I will admit, watching the two of you together, there is something undeniable between you, even beyond the mark." Elena smiled faintly, though uncertainty still lingered beneath the expression. "The bond exists whether I choose to trust him or not, but love, real love, built on trust and understanding, that is something else entirely, something that cannot be forced, simply because ancient magic decided we belong together." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching, and Elena looked up to see one of Draven's personal guards approaching quickly, his expression tense. "My lady," he said, addressing Elena with the respectful title the castle had begun using since her status became known. "The king requests your immediate presence. There has been a development regarding Lord Kale." Elena exchanged a worried glance with Clara, before rising to follow the guard, her heart pounding with uncertainty about what news awaited her. She found Draven in his private study, his expression grim as he paced before the tall windows overlooking the castle grounds. He turned as she entered, relief briefly crossing his features before settling back into tense concern. "What has happened?" Elena asked. "Kale has escaped his cell," Draven said. "Sometime during the night, with help from someone still loyal to him within the castle staff. We do not yet know how far he has gotten, or what he intends to do next." Elena's stomach dropped with sudden fear. "Do you believe he means to come after me? After the child?" "I believe he is desperate," Draven said, "and desperate men often make dangerous choices they would not otherwise consider. I have already doubled the guards around your quarters, and I do not intend to let you out of protected areas until he has been recaptured." "And what of you?" Elena asked, studying his tense posture with growing worry. "If his resentment truly runs as deep as Maribel suggested, you may be his primary target, not simply myself and the child." Draven's expression softened slightly at the concern evident in her voice. "I have survived attempts on my life before, Elena. I do not intend to let my guard down now, especially with so much at stake." Elena crossed the room and took his hands in hers, an act of comfort that surprised them both, given the careful distance they had maintained since her release. "Please be careful," she said softly. "I have only just begun to believe that we might build something real between us. I do not wish to lose that possibility, before it has even had the chance to properly begin." Draven studied her face for a long moment, something warm and fierce kindling in his dark eyes. "I promise you, I will do everything within my power to protect this family we are building, whatever form that protection needs to take." Their quiet moment was interrupted by another guard rushing into the study, his expression urgent. "Your Majesty, we have received word. Lord Kale has been spotted gathering forces near the northern border, apparently attempting to rally support from wolves sympathetic to his claim against the throne." Draven's expression hardened immediately, all softness replaced by the sharp focus of a king preparing for conflict. "Assemble the council immediately. We need to prepare our defenses before he can organize any meaningful threat against the castle." As the guard hurried away to relay the orders, Draven turned back to Elena, his expression torn between duty and the fierce protective instinct that had grown steadily stronger since learning the truth about their child. "I need you to remain here, within the most secure section of the castle, until this threat is fully resolved," he said. "I know that asks a great deal, given everything you have already endured, but I cannot risk your safety, or our child's, while facing whatever Kale intends to bring against us." Elena nodded slowly, understanding the necessity even as fear coiled tightly in her chest. "I will stay, but promise me, You will return safely, whatever happens. I promise, Draven said, though both of them understood that promises made on the eve of conflict could not always be kept, however sincerely intended. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead before leaving to prepare his forces, and Elena stood alone in the study long after he had gone, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, praying to whatever forces governed the ancient bond between them, that the coming days would not tear apart the fragile future they had only just begun to build together. The castle prepared for conflict with a swift, practiced efficiency born from years of experience defending Blackthorn territory against outside threats. Draven organized his forces along the northern approach, positioning his most trusted warriors at key points along the border, while Maribel worked tirelessly to coordinate supplies and reinforcements from allied packs, willing to honor old treaties in the king's time of need. Elena remained within the castle's most secure chambers, deep within the central keep, surrounded by guards Draven trusted completely. Clara stayed close beside her, offering quiet comfort during the tense hours of waiting, as reports trickled in, describing Kael's movements along the northern border. He has gathered perhaps 30 warriors, a scout reported to the assembled council, on the second day of preparations. Mostly younger wolves, disillusioned with their own pack leadership, drawn by promises of power and position under Kael's rule, should he succeed in claiming the throne. 30 warriors is not enough to seriously threaten the castle, one of the older advisors said, though worry still creased his weathered features. Our defenses alone should be sufficient to repel any direct assault. Perhaps, Draven said grimly, but Kael has never relied solely on direct confrontation. I would not be surprised if he intends something more subtle, exploiting weaknesses within our own walls, rather than risking an open battle he knows he cannot win outright. His words proved prophetic sooner than anyone anticipated. That very night, as the castle settled into its usual watch rotation, a small group of Kael's remaining sympathizers within the castle staff attempted to breach the central keep, hoping to reach Elena before Draven's forces could intervene. Elena woke to the sound of shouting and clashing steel echoing through the corridors outside her chambers, her heart pounding with sudden terror as she recognized the unmistakable sounds of combat drawing closer. Clara grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the room's inner chamber, a smaller space designed specifically for emergencies such as this. "Stay here," Clara said urgently, positioning herself before the door with a small blade she had kept hidden beneath her apron. "The guards will come. I will not let anyone reach you." "Clara, please. You do not have to fight for me," Elena said, fear for her friend's safety momentarily overriding her own terror. "You are my friend," Clara said firmly, "and this child deserves the chance to be born into a world where people stood up against cruelty, rather than simply accepting it. I will not step aside now." The door burst open moments later, revealing not Kael's sympathizers but Draven himself, breathing hard from having fought his way through the corridors upon hearing of the breach, his sword still drawn and streaked with evidence of the battle he had just fought. "Elena," he said, relief flooding his features as he saw her safe within the inner chamber. "Are you hurt? Is the child?" "We are both unharmed," Elena said quickly, rushing forward into his arms, despite the blood and chaos still evident around them. "Clara protected me. What of the intruders?" "Subdued," Draven said grimly. 3 of Kael's sympathizers attempted to breach the keep, while his main force staged a distraction along the northern border. We captured 2 alive, though they refused to reveal his current location. Even as he spoke, another guard rushed into the chamber, his expression urgent. "Your Majesty, Lord Kael himself has been spotted approaching the keep directly, apparently having anticipated that his sympathizers' attempt would draw your forces away from the central defenses." Draven's expression hardened with sudden understanding. "He wants to confront me directly, believing he can end this himself while our forces remain divided." "Then let him come," Elena said, surprising herself with the steel in her own voice. "Face him, Draven. End this threat once and for all, so our child can be born into safety rather than constant fear." Draven studied her for a long moment, seeing the fierce determination in her eyes, despite everything she had already endured. He pressed one final kiss to her forehead, before turning to face whatever confrontation awaited him. He found Kael in the castle's central courtyard, standing alone amid the flickering torchlight, his expression wild with desperation and long-simmering resentment, finally boiling over into open confrontation. This ends tonight, cousin, Cale said, drawing his own blade as Draven approached. One way or another, I will not spend my life watching you and your commoner mate claim everything that should have been mine. It was never yours to claim, Draven said evenly, positioning himself carefully as the two circled each other beneath the moonlight. The throne belongs to whoever the ancient laws and the people themselves choose to follow, not to whoever schemes hardest to seize it through deception and cruelty. Cale lunged forward with sudden, desperate speed, and the two men clashed in the courtyard, blades ringing against each other in the tense silence of the night. Draven fought with the disciplined precision of years of training, while Cale fought with the wild, unpredictable fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. The battle stretched on, neither man gaining clear advantage, until finally, Draven managed to disarm his cousin with a swift, decisive strike, sending Cale's blade clattering across the stone courtyard. Cale fell to his knees, breathing hard, finally recognizing the futility of continued resistance. Finish it then, Cale spat, glaring up at Draven with bitter defiance. Kill me, and end this properly, since you have already taken everything else from me. Draven stood over his defeated cousin for a long moment, sword still raised, torn between the fury that demanded justice for everything Cale had done, and the deeper understanding that mercy, properly applied, often proved stronger than vengeance ever could. No, Draven said finally, lowering his blade. You will stand trial for your crimes, properly, before the full council, and face whatever judgment they decide is fitting. I will not become the kind of king who rules through simple execution of anyone who threatens my position. That path leads only to more of exactly what you have already shown this kingdom. As guards moved forward to restrain Cale once more, a sudden commotion arose near the keep's entrance. Elena appeared, having insisted on witnessing the confrontation's resolution despite Clara's protests, and as she stepped into the torchlight, the mark on her collarbone suddenly blazed with brilliant golden light, far brighter than anything either she or Draven had witnessed before. Maribel, arriving alongside the commotion, gasped audibly at the sight, her weathered face filling with stunned recognition. That is not simply a mate mark, Maribel said, approaching slowly, her eyes fixed on the glowing pattern, now clearly visible against Elena's skin. That is the mark of the ancient wolf queens, the bloodline believed lost centuries ago, during the great wars that first divided our packs. Elena stared down at her own glowing mark in stunned confusion. I do not understand. My parents were simple villagers, nothing more. Perhaps your bloodline runs deeper than even you realized, Maribel said, wonder filling her voice. If this mark speaks true, then your child is not simply heir to Draven's throne through the mate bond alone, but through blood claim, reaching back to the very founding of our people. The revelation settled over the courtyard in stunned silence, transforming the night's violence into something far more significant than a simple confrontation between rival cousins. Elena's child, it seemed, was destined to inherit far more than anyone had ever imagined, too. In the weeks that followed, the castle worked to understand the full significance of what had been revealed in the courtyard that night. Maribel spent countless hours poring over ancient texts and records, tracing Elena's lineage back through generations of quiet, unremarkable village life, until she finally uncovered the truth buried within old family records, long forgotten by everyone, except the most dedicated historians. Elena's great-grandmother, it turned out, had been the last known descendant of the ancient wolf queens, a bloodline that once ruled over all the northern packs before the Great Wars scattered their descendants into hiding, fearful of enemies who sought to eliminate any rival claim to power. Over generations, the family had deliberately concealed their heritage, choosing quiet obscurity over the dangers that came with such a powerful bloodline, until the knowledge itself had faded into nothing more than half-remembered village stories. Your child, Maribel explained to Elena and Draven one evening, gathered together in Draven's study, surrounded by ancient texts and carefully unrolled family records, will be heir, not simply to the Blackthorn throne through Draven's line, but to the ancient authority, once held by the Wolf Queens themselves. This is a claim stronger than anything Cale could ever have manufactured, a legitimacy recognized by every pack that still honors the old laws. Elena absorbed this information with quiet astonishment, one hand resting over her now considerably rounded stomach. I never imagined my quiet life concealed such history. My parents never spoke of any of this. Perhaps they did not know themselves, Maribel said gently. Or perhaps they chose deliberately to protect you by keeping the knowledge hidden, understanding the dangers such a bloodline might attract. Draven reached over and took Elena's hand gently in his own, warmth and pride evident in his expression as he looked at her. Whatever the reason for the secrecy, the truth has finally emerged at exactly the moment our kingdom needed it most. Kale's trial begins tomorrow, and this revelation will ensure there can be no lingering doubt about our child's rightful place. Kale's trial proceeded before the full council the following day, the evidence against him laid out in complete and undeniable detail. Faced with the overwhelming proof of his forgery, conspiracy, and attempted violence against the throne, Kale offered little defense beyond bitter silence, his earlier confidence long since shattered by the failure of his final, desperate attempt to seize power through force. The council's judgment was swift and final. Kale was stripped of his title and lands, exiled permanently from Blackthorn territory, forbidden from ever returning under penalty of death should he attempt to defy the ruling. He was led away from the castle in chains, his ambitions finally and completely extinguished, leaving behind a court eager to move forward from the turmoil his betrayal had caused. With the threat finally resolved, the castle turned its attention toward the joyful preparations awaiting the arrival of Elena and Draven's child. Draven, true to his earlier promises, worked steadily to rebuild the trust his early actions had damaged, showing consistent patience and genuine care in every interaction they shared, slowly earning back what his initial judgment had cost him. Elena, in turn, found herself opening her heart more fully with each passing week, watching Draven transform from the cold, guarded king she had first encountered into someone capable of real warmth and vulnerability, someone willing to set aside pride in favor of genuine connection. The mark between them, once a source of confusion and pain, had become instead a quiet, steady comfort, a reminder of the bond that had brought them together despite every obstacle standing in their way. On a bright spring morning, months after the trial's conclusion, Elena went into labor within the same castle that had once held her prisoner, surrounded now by people who loved and supported her, rather than guards enforcing unjust captivity. Draven remained by her side throughout the long hours that followed, his hand steady in hers, his voice a constant source of encouragement and strength. When their daughter finally arrived, healthy and strong, her tiny features already bearing the unmistakable mark of the ancient wolf queens glowing softly against her collarbone, the entire castle erupted into joyful celebration. Bells rang out across Blackthorn territory, announcing the birth of an heir who carried within her the legitimate authority of two powerful bloodlines united at last. Maribel, present for the birth alongside Clara and the castle's most trusted healers, smiled with quiet satisfaction as she watched Draven cradle his newborn daughter for the first time, wonder and fierce love evident in every line of his weathered face. "She will grow into a remarkable leader," Maribel said softly. "Born from love that survived injustice, and from bloodlines that endured through generations of hardship. There is great strength in that kind of beginning." Elena, exhausted but glowing with happiness, watched Draven hold their daughter with a tenderness she never could have imagined from the cold king who had once condemned her without a second thought. He looked up, meeting her eyes, and the love reflected in his expression left no doubt in her mind that the trust she had struggled so hard to rebuild had finally, truly, taken root. "Thank you," Draven said quietly, moving to sit beside her, gently placing their daughter in her arms. "For giving me the chance to become worthy of this family, despite everything I nearly cost us both. We built this together," Elena said softly, looking down at their daughter's peaceful face. "Through hardship and mistakes, and the slow, difficult work of learning to trust again, that is worth far more than anything handed to us easily." In the months that followed, Blackthorn territory flourished under a king who had learned, through painful experience, the true value of listening before judging, of choosing patience over pride, and of honoring the ancient bonds that connected hearts across every obstacle fate could construct. Elena stood beside him not simply as his mate, but as a queen in her own right, her ancient bloodline finally recognized and celebrated, rather than hidden away in fear. Their daughter grew up surrounded by the love and protection that had been fought for so fiercely in the earliest days of her existence, a living symbol of how even the deepest injustice could, with courage and determination, be transformed into something extraordinary. And whenever Draven looked back on those difficult early days, remembering the mark that had burned so fiercely in that dungeon cell, he understood clearly that it had never simply been a curse to be denied. It had been a call toward the very best version of himself, waiting patiently for him to finally answer. The kingdom he built afterward, guided by justice tempered with mercy, and strength tempered with love, stood as lasting proof that even a king who once let pride blind him to the truth could learn, in time, to become exactly the leader his people, his mate, and his daughter truly deserved.